I'm Maya Whitaker, and at 28, I had built something no one in my family believed in. A tech company that could shake the foundation of our century-old textile empire. But growing up as a Whitaker, success only counted if it fit their blueprint. So at this year's family dinner, I sat quietly while they paraded their promotions, their deals, their polished achievements, and reminded me, yet again, that I didn't measure up. But then the butler handed my father a magazine, the latest issue of Vanguard. And right there on the cover was me. That moment changed everything. And for the first time, they finally saw who I really was. Before I tell you exactly how I turned the entire Whitaker legacy upside down, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever been underestimated by the people closest to you, hit like and subscribe. This story might be the reminder you've been waiting for. The Whitaker family wasn't just a family. We were an institution. Whitaker Dynasty Textiles had stood as a pillar of the American luxury textile industry ever since my great-grandfather, Frederick Whitaker, transformed a modest mill into a manufacturing empire back in the 1950s. Our family estate in Charleston, South Carolina, with its sweeping oaks and marble columns, stood tall and proud, like a monument to old money and even older values. It didn't just house a family, it preserved a legacy. Growing up a Whitaker meant your life path wasn't a mystery. It was a blueprint, elite boarding school, Ivy League education, a corner office at Whitaker Dynasty Textiles, preferably before 30. My parents, Grace and Robert Whitaker, mapped out my life long before I could even tie my shoes. My mother, always impeccably styled, with tailored blazers and not a hair out of place, climbed the corporate ladder with polished grace, never once letting the image of the ideal Whitaker wife slip. My father, as CEO, was the Whitaker name personified, tradition-bound, unshakably disciplined, and firmly devoted to the structure that built our empire. They weren't unkind parents. They were simply molded by a world where legacy came before individuality. Numbers come naturally to Maya, my father would boast to his colleagues at company galas, his heavy hand resting on my shoulder like a seal of ownership. She'll be a perfect fit for supply chain management once she finishes Harvard. Never mind that I had never once expressed interest in supply chains, or Harvard, or anything they laid out for me. Then there was my cousin, Liam, the golden boy, the son of my Uncle Mark, 2 years older than me, and carefully groomed since childhood to be the Whitaker family heir. While most teenagers were stumbling their way through self-discovery, Liam was already working summer internships at Whitaker Dynasty, drafting market reports, shaking hands with board members, and sitting in on strategy meetings at our family reunions. Liam landed his first major client account today, Uncle Mark would announce proudly at dinner, his chest practically glowing. Youngest account manager in company history. Mark, my father's brother and his chief rival in the boardroom, never wasted a chance to position his branch of the family as the more capable, more Whitaker-like one. They wore the mask of unity, but behind closed doors, every move was a quiet power play. To Uncle Mark, I was the family disappointment, the odd puzzle piece that didn't fit. "It's a shame Maya lacks Liam's focus," he'd say to my father, loud enough for me to hear from across the room. All that potential wasted on video games. My grandparents had their own take on my quiet rebellion. Grandfather George, the company's patriarch, would listen with mild curiosity when I tried to explain the latest tech I was obsessed with. He rarely challenged my parents' plans for me, but once in a while, I caught a flicker of understanding in his eyes. A silent nod to a language he didn't speak but respected. Grandmother Clara, on the other hand, was the very portrait of old-world social grace. "Maya, darling," she'd say, adjusting my posture with a gentle but firm hand at the small of my back. A Whitaker woman must always carry herself with decorum. Her voice would soften, but the message never changed. This infatuation with electronics, it's unbecoming. But no one wielded judgment quite like Aunt Beatrice, the sharpest thorn on the Whitaker family rosebush. She had married into the family and made up for her outsider status with a fierce, almost fanatical loyalty to Whitaker tradition. My love for technology, in her eyes, wasn't just odd, it was insulting. "Computers and gadgets," she'd sneer, "are just a fad. Real wealth is built on paperwork and handshakes, Maya. Not whatever those boys in Silicon Valley are tinkering with these days." Our annual summer dinner at the family estate was the absolute worst. Less a meal, more a parade of achievements. It was a ceremonial roll call, where every Whittaker was expected to report how they had contributed to the family legacy. From my earliest memories, those dinners felt more like public evaluations than celebrations. Anyone who strayed from the family blueprint was met not with curiosity, but with thinly veiled shame. I remember the year I turned 12. Proudly, I announced that I had taught myself basic programming. Aunt Beatrice smiled, but it was the kind of smile that stopped short of the eyes. "How creative," she said. Voice clipped and cool. "But perhaps you should focus more on your math, dear. Computers come and go. Financial instinct is forever." Her words landed softly, but they carried weight. The kind that lingered in your chest long after dessert was served. By 16, I was building simple apps and winning regional science fairs. But in the family's eyes, these were quaint hobbies at best, distractions at worst. "Maya's won another prize for her computer project," my mother would say, with a strange half-smile, quickly adding, "but she's also maintaining top marks in economics." The family library had no books on computer science. When I asked for a programming manual for Christmas, I received investment strategy guides instead. My laptop, paid for with babysitting money, became a secret, hidden in my closet anytime relatives visited. The message was clear. Technology was a toy, not a career. Real Whittakers worked in textiles, preferably at Whittaker Dynasty Textiles. Every family dinner reinforced this script, this suffocating narrative that one day I'd outgrow my phase and take my place at the company like a proper Whittaker. By the time I left for college, I had learned to keep my real passion quiet. It was easier than enduring the patronizing remarks and worried glances, but the silence only strengthened my resolve. Stanford's computer science program became my escape hatch. 3,000 miles away from Charleston, I could finally breathe. My parents agreed reluctantly because of Stanford's elite business program. They were certain I'd come to my senses and transfer once I got over my tech obsession. But then I met Professor Eris Thorne. After her lecture on advanced algorithm design, I stayed behind with a handful of questions that must have caught her attention. "You think differently, Maya," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Most students treat algorithms like formulas to memorize. You treat them like living puzzles." She became the mentor I never had, opening doors into a world where innovation trumped tradition and ideas mattered more than pedigree. "Your family name might open doors in textiles," she once told me, "but in tech, it's what you build that counts." My first startup, launched during senior year, was a spectacular failure. A peer-to-peer textile traceability platform that collapsed under regulatory red tape. I was too naive, too focused on the tech to grasp the messy legal side of supply chains. When I called home after the collapse, Uncle Mark's voice dripped with smugness. "This is why Whittakers stick to what we know, Maya. Come home. Take the job your father's been saving for you. Enough of this Silicon Valley nonsense." The next 6 months were the darkest chapter of my life. I moved into a tiny apartment in San Francisco, barely leaving except for coffee runs and instant noodles. Depression crept into every waking moment. I questioned everything. Had my family been right all along? And so, we arrive at the moment of truth, the infamous Whittaker family dinner. As I guided my modest electric car through the grand wrought iron gates of the Whittaker estate, past perfectly manicured lawns and the marble fountain that had graced the covers of more textile magazines than I could count, that familiar wave of anxiety crept in. Ahead stood the house itself, a Georgian-style mansion with 22 rooms and enough family history to fill a museum. At the front door, Mr. Henderson, our family's butler of over 30 years, greeted me with the same dignified nod he'd given me since childhood. "Miss Maya," he said, accepting my light coat with quiet ceremony. "The family is gathering in the east drawing room." I smoothed out my simple navy dress, expensive though carefully unpretentious, and took a long, steadying breath. The double doors ahead might as well have been gates to an arena. "Maya, darling." My mother swept toward me, diamonds in her earrings glittering under the chandelier. Her hug was sincere, but brief, the Whittaker family version of affection. "We were starting to think you'd missed dinner entirely," she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach concern. My father nodded from his post by the fireplace. a glass of scotch resting easily in his hand. Traffic from the city, he asked, assuming I still lived in my apartment in Connecticut, not across the country. Something like that, I replied vaguely. Uncle Mark didn't waste time on pleasantries. Headhunter I sent your way. Gregory Stevens, top tier, places talent with the best firms. Heard back? I've been busy with other projects, I said evenly. Projects don't pay the bills, he waved dismissively, unless they've started handing out paychecks for playing with computers these days. Then came Liam, my cousin, radiating polished charm in his custom Chanel suit, a diamond engagement ring gleaming on his finger. He air-kissed both my cheeks. Maya, it's been far too long. I've missed you at the industry mixers. A practiced smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Just promoted to Senior VP of Client Relations. Youngest in Whitaker history. Congratulations, I offered, and meant it, despite everything layered between us. Liam closed the Peterson account last quarter, Uncle Mark declared proudly to the room. $15 million in new capital. Now that's carrying on the Whitaker tradition. My grandmother approached slowly, leaning on her ebony cane, a string of pearls draped elegantly over her precisely styled silver hair. Her sharp blue eyes missed nothing. Maya, she said, voice soft but laced with subtle disapproval, still chasing your passion. A pause. Still in tech? Her faint frown said more than her words as she patted my hand and shuffled toward her favorite wingback chair. Across the room, my grandfather gave me a small, knowing nod, a flicker of warmth behind his stoic demeanor, one of the only cracks in his well-worn composure. At precisely 8 p.m., Mr. Henderson announced that dinner was served, and we filed into the formal dining room. The polished mahogany table gleamed beneath the antique chandelier, set with the family's Wedgwood china and silver flatware gifted to my great-grandparents on their wedding day. I took my assigned seat, the same one I'd been given since graduating college, nestled between Grandma Clara and Cousin Liam, the perfect spot to feel inadequate from both directions. The market has been particularly favorable to traditional investment strategies this quarter, my father began, as Mr. Henderson ladled soup into porcelain bowls. Tech stocks are starting to show cracks, as expected. Looks like Silicon Valley is finally learning about sustainable business models, Uncle Mark added, his gaze landing squarely on me. All flash and disruption, no substance underneath. I sipped my water, choosing silence over confrontation, the lesser sting. Maya, my mother chimed in, voice bright with forced cheer. Why don't you tell everyone what you've been working on lately? Every head turned. Every eye landed on me. This was the moment I dreaded most at every Whitaker family dinner, the spotlight on the daughter who didn't live up to the name. I've been working on textile tech solutions, I said carefully, each word weighed like glass. Still with that tiny startup that failed? Aunt Beatrice chimed in, her voice laced with syrupy concern. No, I replied, keeping my tone even. I've moved on to other projects. Uncle Mark leaned forward, never one to let ambiguity slide. Which company? Anyone we'd know? It's still in development, I deflected, hoping to steer the conversation away. Liam, ever the diplomat, slid smoothly into the gap. Whitaker Dynasty's innovation division has been exploring some exciting tech applications too. Nothing too disruptive, of course, just enhancements to our traditional services. That's a sensible approach, Aunt Beatrice nodded approvingly. Technology should be a tool, not a replacement for proven methods. And just like that, the conversation floated toward Liam's recent accolades and my cousin Ethan's new position at Goldman Sachs. I focused on my perfectly crisp duck confit and nodded where politeness required, letting their voices drift like background music I didn't care for. Maya's always been bright, my mother said during a lull, her voice soft but uncertain. She just needs to find her place. At 28, I was managing my first fund, Uncle Mark cut in. It's about focus and relentless commitment to excellence. Different times, Mark, Grandfather George said quietly. The world's not the same as it was. Some things never change, Aunt Beatrice replied sharply. Success still comes from hard work, relationships, and being properly positioned in established industries. As Mr. Henderson cleared the main course, Aunt Beatrice turned her full attention to me, her diamond bracelet clinking lightly against her wine glass. She leaned in, eyes narrowing with polite menace. Still between things, dear, she asked sweetly. At your age, I was already on 2 corporate boards and had chaired the Whitaker Foundation Gala for 3 years running. Silence fell across the table, thick and expectant. It was a scene I'd lived through more times than I could count. The public reminder that I, Maya Whitaker, had yet to meet the bar. I drew a slow breath. I wouldn't say I'm between things exactly. Oh? Aunt Beatrice raised a perfectly penciled brow. Then what do you call it? Freelancing, consulting, or still just dabbling in your little computer hobby? Before I could respond, Mr. Henderson entered the dining room, oddly out of rhythm. He never interrupted the main course discussion. In his hands was a silver tray, carrying a single magazine. Apologies for the interruption, he said with practiced decorum, but Mr. Roberts' Vanguard issue has arrived. He requested textile industry publications be delivered immediately upon receipt. My heart skipped. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, or more terrifying. Mr. Henderson approached my father with the tray, the magazine cover turned face down as always. My father barely glanced at it, still mid-sentence about quarterly forecasts. Thank you, Henderson. As I was saying, a conservative strategy has once again. He turned the magazine over and stopped cold. Words caught in his throat. He stared at the cover, frozen. 1 second, then 2. The room noticed. Heads began to turn. Robert, my mother asked gently, is everything all right? His face drained of color. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again, but no sound came. Instead, he slowly flipped the magazine around for all to see. And there I was, standing confidently before a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the San Francisco Bay. Arms crossed, black turtleneck, a calm, deliberate smile. Above my image, bold letters declared, Maya Whitaker, the youngest disruptor in global textiles. The silence around the table was complete. Not even the clink of silverware dared to break the sudden vacuum of sound. My mother's water glass slipped from her hand, spilling across the white linen tablecloth, yet no one moved to dab it dry. Uncle Mark reached for the magazine with trembling fingers. This has to be, he stammered, eyes darting between the cover and my face, as if trying to reconcile 2 versions of reality. Liam leaned over his shoulder, his complexion as pale as the tablecloth. Fiberflow, he whispered. His M. Whitaker is our M. Whitaker? Grandmother Clara's teacup clattered against its saucer. Maya, she said sharply, explain this right now. Aunt Beatrice's mouth opened, then closed, gaping like a fish out of water. For the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. At last, my father found his voice. Is this some sort of joke? A mock-up you created? I drew in a deep breath. After 3 years of secrecy, sidestepping questions, and enduring quiet condescension, the moment had finally arrived. Not the way I planned, but perhaps exactly how it needed to happen. It's real, I said, my voice calm, steady. The issue hits stands tomorrow. Fiberflow is mine. I founded it 3 years ago. Fiberflow, my father repeated slowly. The supply chain security system First National Textiles just deployed across all their branches? That Fiberflow? I nodded. And 17 other major textile companies, 3 of them international. We're currently valued at just over $5 billion. My mother's hand flew to her pearl necklace. Uncle Mark stared at me, stunned. $5 billion, he asked, almost breathless. And you own it? All of it, I clarified. I retain majority ownership, 63%. The rest belongs to early investors and employee stock options. Grandmother Clara placed a hand over her chest. You're telling us you built a technology empire while we thought you were between jobs? Yes. But why the secrecy? My mother asked softly, hurt catching in her voice. Why not tell your own family? I looked around the table, at the faces that had shaped my entire life, faces that had dismissed my passion as a phase, my ambition as naive, and my vision as unrealistic. Would you have understood, I asked gently? Would you have supported me? Or would you have told me, like you always did, that technology was just a trend, and real success came from following the Whitaker way? No one answered. The truth hung between us, suspended in the quiet like fine dust in sunlight. Suddenly, Grandfather George let out a low, rolling laugh that startled the entire room. It started as a chuckle and built into a deep, booming roar that made the crystal glasses tremble. "Magnificent," he declared, slapping the table with delight. "Absolutely magnificent." "Still a Whittaker through and through," he said, raising his glass toward me. "Just doing it your way." To Maya, who understands what so many forget, that tradition without innovation is nothing but stagnation. The silence shattered like glass underfoot. Questions poured from every direction all at once. How did you start? When did this happen? Why didn't you tell us? How much is the company worth? I lifted one hand, and to my surprise, the room quieted instantly. Something had shifted. The gravitational pull of power in the Whittaker family had tilted, and there would be no going back. "I'd be happy to explain everything," I said. "But first, I need to make one thing clear. I didn't build FiberFlow to prove anyone wrong, or to earn this family's approval. I built it because I believed in the vision, because I knew, deep down, it was what I was meant to create." My father nodded slowly, his face a complicated blend of pride, confusion, and the first hints of regret. "There's a lot for us to talk about," he said. "There certainly is," I agreed. Dinner was entirely forgotten. Mr. Henderson discreetly signaled the staff to clear the untouched desserts as the entire family drifted toward the grand salon. The Vanguard magazine passed from hand to hand like a sacred relic. "It says here," Uncle Mark read aloud, his voice teetering between disbelief and awe. "She developed a proprietary algorithm that can detect fraudulent textile transactions with 99.8% accuracy. That's unprecedented. Our core tech uses a neural network trained on millions of data points," I explained. "Legacy systems rely on static rules, which makes them vulnerable to modern threats. Ours evolves in real time." My father paced near the fireplace, pausing every few steps to study me with new eyes. "Do you realize what this means for the industry? This could transform how textile security is handled globally." "That was the idea," I said. "It always was the idea." "I always knew you had potential," Uncle Mark announced, conveniently forgetting years of subtle put-downs. "Whittakers are born with business in their blood. I'll admit, tech wasn't where I expected to see it play out." I couldn't help smiling at the revisionist history unfolding in real time. "Really? That's not how I remember our career chats going." He looked momentarily flustered. "Well, maybe I was a bit traditional in my thinking." Liam sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, his expression a complex mix of admiration and confusion. "So when we talked last Christmas," he began, "and I was going on about my promotion, I was talking to the founder and CEO of FiberFlow." I nodded gently, his cheeks flushed. I must have sounded so shallow. "You sounded passionate about your work," I corrected. "There's nothing wrong with that." My mother sat beside me, her hand occasionally brushing my arm as though confirming I was real. "I just don't understand," she said quietly. "Why didn't you tell us, Maya? We're your family." "Are you sure, Mom?" I asked softly. "Be honest. 3 years ago, if I'd said I was turning down a role at Whittaker Dynasty to start a tech company in San Francisco, what would you have said?" She looked down at her hands. "I would have thought you were making a mistake." "Everyone would have," I said, glancing around the room. "And you would have tried to talk me out of it. You would have made me doubt myself, made me second-guess everything. I had to do it my way." "But we could have helped," my father said firmly, "with connections, with capital." "I didn't want Whittaker connections, or Whittaker capital," I interrupted. "I wanted to succeed, or fail, on my own merit, not because of my name." A heavy stillness settled over the room as they absorbed that truth, a truth so far removed from how the Whittaker family operated, it felt almost foreign. Then at last, Aunt Beatrice, who had been suspiciously quiet, spoke up. "Well," she said with rehearsed warmth, "I always said Maya had a unique way of seeing the world." Her attempt to hitch herself to my success was so transparent, I almost laughed. "Did you?" I asked sweetly. "Because I distinctly remember you saying my little computer hobby was a waste of time, that it would never amount to anything." Her smile tightened. "You must have misunderstood, dear. I was only concerned you'd find a practical outlet for your talents." I decided not to press further. Her sudden rewrites of our history said enough. Grandmother Clara stepped forward slowly, her eyes scanning me as though she were truly seeing me for the very first time. I'd love to visit your office someday, Maya, she said quietly, just to understand what it is you've built. The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. I'd love that too, Grandma, I replied, surprised by how much I meant it. Around me, phones began to light up. One by one, my relatives started Googling fiber flow, scrolling through headlines, valuations, and industry awards I had never mentioned. The room shifted as they read, expressions morphing from skepticism to stunned recognition. You were named Tech Innovator of the Year last fall, Cousin Ethan blurted out. There was a ceremony and everything. I sent my CTO to accept the award, I explained. At the time, I wasn't ready to go public. The company's valuation is... Uncle Mark stared at his screen, blinking in disbelief. This can't be real. $5.2 billion at our last funding round, I confirmed. Though that number might climb after tomorrow's feature. My father collapsed into his favorite leather chair like someone had knocked the wind from him. My daughter is a billionaire, he said to no one in particular. A billionaire I was trying to hire into a junior role at Whittaker Dynasty. Just then, Mr. Henderson reappeared. Entering quietly with a tray of brandy, he cleared his throat gently. If I may, Miss Maya, I've been following your quarterly reports. Remarkable growth curve, especially in the European sector. All eyes snapped toward him, stunned. You knew? My mother asked, wide-eyed. Mr. Henderson straightened with calm dignity. I subscribe to a few tech newsletters, ma'am. Fiberflow's been featured for quite some time. The leadership profile for M. Whittaker bore a striking resemblance to Miss Maya, though the photos were always artfully obscured. I couldn't help but laugh. Thank you for your discretion, Mr. Henderson. He inclined his head with a faint smile. Not my secret to share, miss. As Mr. Henderson passed out the brandy, the questions grew sharper, more focused. Why reveal yourself now, my father asked. Why step into the light? It was becoming harder to keep the identities separate, I said. And hiding who I was had started holding the company back. We're preparing for an IPO next year, and transparency will be critical for investor trust. IPO? Uncle Mark perked up, suddenly alert with interest. Well, naturally, Whittaker Dynasty should underwrite it. I can get you in touch with our best team right away. And there it was. The attempt to repackage my success, fold it neatly under the Whittaker umbrella. I'd been waiting for this moment. Thank you for the offer, Uncle Mark, I said evenly. But we've already signed with Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan Chase. The paperwork was finalized last month. His face fell. But we're family. Surely you'd want this to stay within the Whittaker empire. Fiberflow isn't part of the Whittaker empire, I said firmly. It never was. And it never will be. It's its own entity. The temperature in the room dropped a few degrees as the weight of that statement settled in. Maya, my father began cautiously. You must understand how this looks. A Whittaker family member building a textile empire outside the family business. I know exactly how it looks, I answered. It looks like I took my own path and made it work. As the evening wore on, the family slowly dispersed, each retreating in their own way to process what had unfolded. By midnight, only my father remained in his study, sipping scotch and staring into the fireplace, as though it might offer answers he couldn't find elsewhere. I tapped gently on the half-open door. May I come in? He looked up, his expression unreadable. Of course. I settled into the leather chair across from him, surrounded by the familiar scent of cedar, aged leather, and quiet legacy. The same study where, as a child, I had been summoned for lectures on disappointment, or occasionally, expectation. Are you angry with me? I asked softly. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, watching it catch the light of the fire. Not angry, he said finally. Maybe hurt. 3 years, Maya. You built something extraordinary, and you didn't trust us enough to share it. It wasn't about trust, I said gently. It was about space. I needed room to succeed or fail without carrying the weight of the Whittaker name on my shoulders. We just wanted what was best for you. You wanted what you thought was best, I said, not unkindly. There's a difference. He considered that, then nodded slowly. You're right, but I still don't understand. Why technology of all things? The Whittaker legacy has always been about textiles. And it still is, I said. But the future of textiles is technology. The companies that refuse to adapt will be left behind. I saw that years ago. I tried to explain it, but no one wanted to listen. He winced slightly at the truth of that. We've been doing business the same way for 4 generations. That kind of history. It builds resistance to change. I know. That's why I had to take my own path. Whitaker Dynasty sees tech as a tool. I see it as a foundation. My father leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and let out a breath that felt older than him. I've been afraid, Maya, for years, watching these tech companies disrupt century-old industries, textiles, manufacturing, distribution, all of it changing before our eyes. And I've been gripping the wheel of a ship that might already be sinking. His vulnerability startled me. Robert Whitaker had always been a fortress of confidence and control. It's not sinking, Dad, I said gently. It's evolving, and it needs to evolve faster. Fiberflow isn't here to replace the textile world. It's here to protect it. We help factories become safer, and transactions become more secure. So you're not trying to make Whitaker Dynasty obsolete, he asked, a ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. I'm trying to make sure it has a future, I replied. The world still needs the relationships and expertise that companies like yours bring. But that world has to rest on a platform strong enough to face modern threats. He nodded slowly, a thoughtful weight behind the gesture. Then maybe it's time I learned more about that platform. A soft knock interrupted us. My mother stood at the doorway, her usual pristine composure just slightly unraveled. May I join you? She asked, voice tentative. I nodded, and she perched on the armrest of my father's chair, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. Maya, she said frankly, I owe you an apology. I should have supported your interests, not tried to redirect them. I was so focused on what a Whitaker life should look like, I never stopped to see what you were building right in front of me. Thank you, I said, genuinely moved. That means a lot. I want to understand what you do, she continued, her voice quiet but firm. Really understand, not just nod and change the subject like I've done for years. We talked until the sky began to lighten, my parents asking deeper and more honest questions than I ever thought I'd hear. And for the first time, I felt seen, not as a Whitaker who strayed, but as Maya, the woman who carved her own way forward. The next day brought a series of quiet, private conversations with other members of the family. Each one opened a different door, some to growth, some to understanding, some to resistance. Still, after breakfast, I found Liam waiting for me on the rooftop terrace, 2 steaming cups of coffee in hand. He said nothing as he handed me one, then leaned silently on the stone railing beside me. I was jealous of you, Liam admitted after a long stretch of silence. For years I thought I was flying while you were crawling. Turns out, I was flying, but you were soaring. That's not fair, I protested gently. You've achieved exactly what you set out to do. You're brilliant at what you do, Liam. Just because I chose a different path doesn't diminish your success. He gave a quiet, lopsided smile. But your path was carved. Mine was inherited. Yours took courage, real courage. It was also terrifying, I confessed. And lonely. There were so many nights I wanted to call you for advice or just to vent, but I couldn't without revealing everything. Well, now you can, he said, meeting my gaze. Anytime. No competition, no judgment. Just family. Uncle Mark's approach, by contrast, was as transactional as expected. He cornered me in the library with a folder full of projections and a proposal to form a strategic partnership between Whitaker Dynasty and Fiberflow. We could create a dedicated security division under the Whitaker umbrella, he said eagerly. Your tech, our client base, it's the perfect synergy. I closed the folder without even looking at the numbers. I appreciate the offer, Uncle Mark, truly. But Fiberflow will remain independent. We'd love to have Whitaker Dynasty as a client, but not as a parent company. His smile tightened. You're making a mistake. You need our name, our reputation in textiles. Our name is holding just fine, I said calmly, but thank you for your concern. Aunt Beatrice, as expected, made several attempts to revise our shared history, each version more dramatic than the last. I always told your mother you had a certain spark, she insisted over lunch, something different from the usual Whitaker ambition. I saw it even when you were little. Rather than confront her directly, I asked sweetly, what was it exactly about my early interest in technology that you found so promising, Aunt Beatrice? I'd really love to know what stood out. Her momentary pause was answer enough, but the most unexpected conversation came from Grandfather George. He asked me to take a walk with him through the garden, his pace slow but deliberate along the gravel paths, his cane tapping softly beside him. "Did I ever tell you about my first venture?" he asked out of nowhere. "Not Whittaker Dynasty, the expansion from great-grandfather Jacob's mill. No, before that," he chuckled to himself. "When I was 22, I tried to start a textile market monitoring service. Using one of the earliest computers to track pricing trends and send alerts, I stopped in my tracks. You never mentioned anything about computers." "Because it failed spectacularly," he said with a grin. "The tech wasn't ready. The market wasn't either. My father called it a foolish distraction and pulled me into the family business. And well, the rest is history. I built Whittaker Dynasty into what it is today." "Do you regret letting go of that first idea?" I asked quietly. He looked off into the trees, his voice soft. "I regret not trusting my instinct about the direction the future was heading. The idea itself wasn't wrong, it was just too early." Then he turned to me, eyes sharp despite his age. "I've been watching you, you know. Surprised? I may be old, Maya, but I'm not stupid. I had my assistant start printing articles about fiber flow since your first funding round. Your pseudonym wasn't exactly foolproof, for someone who's known you since you were born. I was stunned. You knew this whole time. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you needed to do it on your own," he said simply. "Some paths can only be walked alone, at least at the start." He patted my hand. "I'm proud of you, not just for your success, but for your courage to break the mold." The Whittaker legacy was never truly about textiles. It was about building something that lasts. And you've done that, just in your own way. That evening, I made my decision. "I'd like to invite all of you to visit the FiberFlow headquarters next month," I announced at dinner, "to see what we're building, meet the team, and better understand the technology behind it." "I'd love that," my father said, as murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. "But I need to be clear about something," I continued. "This is not an invitation to absorb FiberFlow into Whittaker Dynasty. It's a chance for understanding, maybe even collaboration as equals, but not acquisition or control." My father nodded slowly. "Understood. We'll come as family, not financiers." "Well," Uncle Mark chimed in, "maybe a bit of both," earning a sharp glance from my grandmother. "We'll come as learners," she corrected firmly. It's time the Whittaker family started catching up with the future. As I looked around the table, at the faces that had once judged, dismissed, and underestimated me, I realized something unexpected. Success hadn't changed me nearly as much as it had changed them. Their perceptions had shifted, but who I was at the core, that had remained the same all along. For so long, I had craved their approval, only to discover that what I truly needed was confidence in myself, and that I had built brick by brick, line by line of code, alongside FiberFlow. 6 months after the Vanguard reveal, I hosted the first ever West Coast Whittaker family dinner in my San Francisco penthouse. It couldn't have been more different from the Charleston estate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the bay, sleek modern furniture replaced inherited antiques, and no oil portraits loomed over us like ghosts of past generations. As my family arrived, I noticed subtle shifts in our dynamics. My father and grandfather were quickly drawn to the windows, discussing skyline development and real estate trends, common ground they could finally share. My mother and grandmother admired my contemporary art collection, asking thoughtful questions about the local artists I support. Even Uncle Mark had adjusted his tone, though he still managed to mention strategic synergies between our companies at least once an hour. FiberFlow's European expansion is moving faster than we projected, I explained, as we gathered around a long communal table set with a seasonal farm-to-table dinner, a far cry from the white glove formality they were used to. "We opened offices in London, Berlin, and Stockholm last quarter," I added. "The Frankfurt Banking Association signed on last week." My COO, Lauren, chimed in. I had invited my executive team to join us, breaking yet another Whittaker family tradition. That dinner was for blood relatives only. "Your security protocol prevented 3 major hacking attempts on First National Textiles last month," my father noted. "Their board chair couldn't stop praising you at the industry summit." "The system works," I said simply. "That's what matters." To my surprise, the conversation flowed easily, from tech to family stories, from market trends to personal updates. The rigid boundaries of Whitaker family dinners had softened, allowing something new, a natural blend of the professional and the personal. After dinner, Liam joined me on the balcony, both of us gazing out as the fog rolled gently beneath the Golden Gate Bridge. "I've been thinking about your approach," he said thoughtfully. "How you didn't try to fix an old structure but built something entirely new instead." Then, with a small smile, he added, "And I'm launching an innovation division at Whitaker Dynasty." I turned to him, surprised. "Dad finally approved it last week," he said. "We're going to focus on integrating emerging tech into our traditional service models." I smiled, this time with pride. "That's incredible, Liam. Truly, it is." "It's small compared to what you've built," Liam said with a self-deprecating laugh. "It's not about size," I replied gently. "It's about impact. You're changing Whitaker Dynasty from the inside, and that might be even harder than what I've done." Back inside, I found my parents and grandparents gathered around Fiberflow's digital wall display, watching in quiet awe a real-time constellation of our global security system protecting textile transactions around the world. "It's beautiful," my mother murmured, her voice full of wonder, like a constellation of safety. "That's exactly how I see it," I said, surprised and moved by her understanding. My grandmother reached for my hand, her grip both firm and warm. "I was wrong, Maya," she said. "We all were, trying to force you into the old Whitaker mold. Sometimes the greatest way to honor a legacy is to reimagine it." Over the past 6 months, the collaboration between Whitaker Dynasty and Fiberflow had grown into something I never anticipated. An authentic partnership that benefited us both. My father had embraced the shift with unexpected enthusiasm, becoming a vocal advocate for digital security in traditional textile circles. The Whitaker name now stood for more than tradition. It stood for transformation, blending timeless craftsmanship with cutting-edge innovation. Becoming a bridge between two textile worlds, others were still scrambling to connect. Not every relationship had healed completely. Aunt Beatrice still dropped comments about fortunate timing or riding the tech wave, unable to fully admit that my success came from vision and perseverance, not luck. Some wounds run deep. Some patterns are hard to unlearn, but I'd made peace with that imperfect reconciliation. I no longer needed everyone's approval, and that freedom was more valuable than any business triumph. As the evening wound down, my grandfather raised his glass for a final toast. "To Maya," he said, voice steady and proud, "who taught this old textile family the most important lesson of all. That innovation without tradition may shine briefly, but tradition without innovation is doomed to fade. You honored the Whitaker legacy by redefining it." Later that night, long after the last goodbye, I stood alone by the window. The fog rolled in over the bay as I reflected on the journey. 3 years of secrecy, 3 years of building something radical, while being dismissed by those whose approval I once thought I needed most. Vindication was sweet, but the real victory wasn't proving them wrong. It was discovering I didn't need their permission to be right. The next morning, the latest issue of Vanguard hit the newsstands. On the cover were 2 buildings side by side, the classical columns of Whitaker Dynasty's headquarters in Charleston, and the sleek glass tower of Fiberflow in San Francisco. The headline read, "When Tradition Meets Innovation, the Whitaker Legacy Evolves." The article chronicled our unlikely partnership and its broader impact on the textile industry. How legacy institutions and tech disruptors could work together, not against each other, creating stronger systems side by side than they ever could alone. I thought about the other young innovators out there, those pushing against family expectations, cultural pressures, and institutional resistance. Brilliant minds with visions others can't yet see. My journey from underestimated dreamer to industry leader could now serve as a blueprint. Proof that persistence and belief in your own vision can outlast even the most entrenched skepticism. Success isn't measured in wealth or recognition, though both can be satisfying. True success lies in authenticity, in building something that reflects your unique perspective and adds genuine value to the world around you. The Whitaker legacy will live on, not as a rigid tradition handed down unchanged, but as a living, evolving force, adapting to new realities while staying rooted in our values of excellence and bold innovation. And I have found my place within that legacy, not by staying within its lines, but by widening them to make space for what's next. But what about your story? Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever proven someone wrong? Someone who didn't believe in you? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story spoke to you, if it stirred something real in your heart, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who might need a gentle reminder. The most meaningful validation doesn't come from the outside, it comes from within. Remember, sometimes the people closest to us are the last to see our potential, but that doesn't make our potential any less real. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.